Welcome back, everyone. We're gonna go ahead and get started with the panel. My name is Lou Powell. I'm with Vanik Digital. We are a CA partner on the APIM side of the house, so very invested in the API side. And I'm going to be moderating the panel this morning. So I'm going to introduce our experts, our panelists, and I'm going to start with Sangeeta Narayanan, who is the Director of Engineering from Netflix, and ask you to tell a little about yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Sangeeta. I run an engineering team at Netflix. We are focused on developer experience and operational insights for all the Netflix developers who work on the apps and clients and the devices that hopefully most of you watch Netflix on.
And our next panelist is Cassie Schum, who is a lead developer consultant with ThoughtWorks.
Hi. I've been at ThoughtWorks for about 6 years now, and so what I primarily do is go around to different clients and companies and talk to them about, well, these days it's been about microservices. I blame Sam for that one. He's also a thought worker who wrote that book, and so the past couple of years I've been going to many different clients and looking at what their company looks like, and are they microservices ready or even continuous delivery ready, and those types of things. So that's.
Okay. And next we have Eric S., who's an engineer with Jet.com.
Uh, yes, so I'm on the core infrastructure team, so helping to run core infrastructure and platform development at Jet. We're actually probably the youngest team there right now, and our primary focus is actually working with all of the other engineering teams to find the pain points they have that are cross-cutting, and build out basically infrastructure and tooling that makes their lives easier, and at the same time working on building out a platform development tools, language, whatever you want to call it, that allows developing distributed systems and microservices to be as basically as easy to work with and as easy to reason about as possible, and hopefully get it to the point where it's very easy to be successful when you build out your microservice or even monolithic service system.
Okay. And we have Adrian Treneman, who is the SVP of Engineering with HBC Digital, Gilt.com.
Yeah, hi. So my name's Aid. I lead the engineering teams for Gilt and HPC Digital in New York, Dublin, and Tokyo. And there's a whole bunch of, great retail brands involved there. Gilt.com, Saks.com, SaksAllFifth.com, The Bay, Lord and Taylor. So it's a pretty complex kind of space that we're in. I'm actually 5 years old today. I am 5 years at Gilt. It's pretty exciting. I think one of the things that has brought me to this stage is about 3 or 4 years ago, we chose to explode our monolith. We now run Gilt on a field of about 300 microservices over multiple different deployment mechanisms over AWS. And I think it's amazing, the transition from a monolith to microservices has been incredible for us. And it's a journey that was hard, but it's certainly something that we feel really, really great about.
Many of you may be starting with microservices or may be maturing into microservices, but we've got this panel of experts who's got an amazing amount of understanding and knowledge and experience and history behind this. So we'd like to build on that and go a little bit more into some of the things that have worked and not worked, and maybe some best practices and some learning that you can get from them to help you take that back to your shop and do microservices in a better way. So with that, let's start with some questions that might crack open some of the things that are working a little bit better. So we look at microservices and go, they're definitely not a magic pill for everything, right? They don't solve every problem. So let's start with you, Sangeeta. Where are microservices an ideal fit?
So in terms of benefits, right, you want to look at the big one is velocity, right? Today it's all about being able, time to market is important. That's what's key for the business. So if that's the goal, it's definitely a big fit. The ability to evolve independently, iterate rapidly, if that's important, it's a big fit. You definitely want to look at scale, right? If you're a startup with 10 engineers, would not go with it. The overhead, in my mind, is not worth it. So some of the factors you want to keep in mind are really what scale, at what point is the additional overhead and complexity worth it, and where are you able to easily partition your domain into discrete domains that microservices work for you.
Excellent. Eric, did you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I would agree, I think, pretty completely. Where they work is, in my experience, where they don't work is when you're first starting a new project or team, or a new domain, or you're just starting your company, just because of the massive infrastructure and the maintenance issues it causes. Figuring out and understanding and reasoning about your system as a whole, even if it's just a component within a large thing, is much harder when it's microservices. And debugging it afterwards is also much harder. So you focus on just understanding what you're actually trying to build in the simplest way possible, and then move to microservices when it starts making sense. But I think, like Sangeeta said, it's when you have a system where you need to have very high, very variable velocity across many tightly related components, and you want to be able to change one feature very easily and get it out there without having to deploy your entire system for that. Coordinate everyone within your team and potentially everyone who interacts with your team to know what's happening. You want to be able to just get it out there, test it very quickly, and push it out there and have these new features and not have to worry about coordinating velocity and tying those all together across maybe 10 or 15 people all at the same time.
Very good. So, did you want to jump
I,
in?
I did want to jump in a little
Yeah,
bit.
absolutely.
I think completely agree with both points. And also I wanted to add, it definitely works well in organizations that are flexible and have that buy-in. If we're an organization that is very hierarchical and will not be able to form feature-driven teams and those types of things easily, then microservices doesn't seem to work as well.
One of the things I think that we found was, so we had a very large organization, about 120 engineers, all competing over the same code base. And that was a complete nightmare. And our desire was to free up the teams and have kind of, lots of small, autonomous, fast-moving teams. And when you go that way, you end up with, lots of small, autonomous, fast-moving services, right? So I think that's great. I think, though, I don't know, there's been a couple of mentions there about the overhead and the complexity. I think there is a bit of overhead, but I actually don't think it's as bad as all that. And I think what happens with microservices is we move the complexity out of one big fat monolith into the space between a number of services that are collaborating, right? And in a sense, I think what you got to hope in that transformation from a monolith to microservices is that you've created something where the units are easier to understand, and hopefully you can handle the complexity at a larger level. And I think that's really the challenge, but it's not unsurmountable.
Every transition has its challenges. So as people are looking at going from that monolith to the microservice, what things did you experience that were difficult?
The first time we created autonomous teams, we said, there you go, everyone's a startup, go for it, right? And everybody went, right? It's like if you've ever flown an airplane, the first time you get control of the wheel, you don't want to move the wheel at all, right? And nobody knew what they should do, what they should focus on, right? And somebody mentioned earlier today, in a sense that we had the culture right, but we needed the leadership. We needed to make sure that teams knew what the most important thing was. So getting that right and getting a KPI-driven model where basically people knew what it was that they were trying to achieve, and then we just let the team run at it. I think that was the hardest bit, I think, to kick everything going. Apart from that, the other thing as well, which I think in hindsight is great, I think 5-10 years ago, you would have had a tendency for an organization to top-down tell people, this is the technology you're using. So we're all using the Play framework, microservices, blah, 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 blah. And actually stepping back and saying, we're not making those decisions for the teams. They're going to make them themselves. And that's going to lead to complexity and diversity, but actually it's a gamble, right? It paid off. So.
Microservices is relatively new, and as I talk to folks, we find that there's this very diverse understanding of microservices. So when you're looking at going and helping someone with microservices, what do you find is the most misunderstood or misapplied expectation about microservices?
Oh boy, how much time do we have? No, well, I mean, so I think the first problem that we have is people love the new buzzword and everyone thinks this is silver bullet. And so they say, oh, here we go. I want microservices for my organization, and that's going to make me go faster because they've read Sam's book and they've read a few things, and they're like, let's do it. What I really focus on, or like when our teams go in to focus on the different organizations, is every organization is different. Everyone has different problems, and what we really focus on is what are those specific problem sets, and does microservices actually, is that the solution for you, or is that the way forward for you guys? More times out of none, we actually find organizations who don't even have a CI pipeline or have continuous delivery. So they sort of try to jump ahead and say, we will do microservices without the maturity of having everything else in place. And so that's probably the biggest struggle that we have, because we're trying to pull them back, even though we know about microservices. And they're like, but you're the experts. And we're like, right, but you have to be mature enough to think about microservices and see where your problem sets are in your organization.
Can I?
Yeah, go, please.
So I actually have a sort of a follow-on question. In the case where, let's say, they're not ready, they don't have a CI/CD pipeline, right? You could approach it as, hey, this is your opportunity, because now you have a monolith, you have all this baggage. Well, why don't I start fresh with this, a microservice for maybe a small domain area, and use that as an opportunity to get the culture, the best practices, the tooling in place.
Absolutely, yep. And there are some organizations that we do go in there and we say, okay, let's take that small slither, we were talking about this earlier,
Right.
let's take a small slither of your organization and prove out a little bit
Right.
of what that may look like. And in the meantime, actually implement the CI/CD pipeline, like actually get that little piece
Right.
into a mature state. Usually that small piece is, as we were talking about earlier, is the not as risky part of the business, right? So
Yeah.
if we're talking about a banking industry, we probably won't be taking their payments domain and changing that. We'll probably be taking something like rewards or something that doesn't take their business down. So
At the end of the day, it's all about either changing the risk multiplier or changing the cost multiplier. You're either making it cheaper for failure or you're making it less likely that failure happens. And I think the goal around microservices is that when you have a very high changing or highly evolving system that you want to be able to work with and deploy new things very quickly, the goal there is that you make it less risky to push those changes out because you only have to change much smaller components, and you also make the cost of failure cheaper, because if you do it wrong, the scope of the impact is much smaller. And that's kind of what you're hoping to get. But as Sangeeta said, and actually as Gilt went through, is you start out, for pretty much everyone right now, you start out with already a pretty good understanding of what your system is doing, so that you can identify what parts will actually benefit from going to microservices, versus starting like at Jet. We started with microservices from the get-go, and what you don't realize is the incidental complexity around microservices right now is huge, and not a lot of people realize it. So it's not necessarily that it's very hard to work with initially once you get it going, but the incidental complexity that comes in with actually being able to maintain 300 microservices is huge. And if you don't realize it, you try to do 300 microservices right out of the gate when you still don't really know your system. The risk, you now have taken the risk factor much higher, and you don't really realize it because the incidental complexity is hidden, and very rarely do people take that into account.
But think about it like so the complexity arises, okay? But I think it arises because if I look at our experience, we exploded, lots of services everywhere, right? And what I think is interesting is there was no design, right? If we'd sat down in a room for a week to try and come up with a design of what our microservice architecture would look like, we would have never ended up with what we got, right? So it's very much you get this emergent design. And I think that if I think there's an adoption curve for everyone to go through. We got excited. We made billions of services. Everybody was writing a new service every day. Then we got overexcited, and then we got really depressed at what we had done, right? But then all of a sudden we started to pull it back and say, we don't need that service over there. We now celebrate killing a service as much as we celebrate actually creating a new one.
Yeah.
And I think it's been great to kind of one of the big missions or the big things for us has been ownership, understanding, learning with the complexity. And and in a sense we've done that by by having an organization that kind of matches the emergent architecture that we've built. And I think that's actually been very powerful for us.
Yep, I would agree with that. And sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to quickly interject. As long as you're willing to buy into the risk
Yeah.
and you are aware of the
Yeah.
incidental complexity right now, once you get over the hump and you get through it and everyone accepts and gets comfortable with they have to. There's a lot more work around managing all of your services is you build very complex, technically challenging systems just to manage your services, like Mesos or Nomad from HashiCorp. Very interesting systems whose sole purpose is to just make sure things are running.
Right.
And once you realize that there is also very new technical challenges that are very advanced and very complex around managing 300 microservices, and you buy into it and you accept it just like a database for managing a lot of data, then you start accounting for things properly, and it becomes much more smooth and much more exciting and much more comfortable, I think.
Yeah.
But you've got to get over that hump. And I
Right.
think even when people tell you right now microservices are so new, the architecture is so new and there's so much infrastructure, and just the infrastructure is changing so fast, even if you expect it and you account for the incidental complexity, I don't think you'll really realize
Yeah.
what the experience is like.
So you've hit some of the highlights, right? We're looking at it and saying autonomous teams that need to be able to move independently in the direction that makes sense for them. But we also have this challenge, and one of the biggest challenges is that cultural, right? So we start looking at the culture of innovation is a big part of the success of microservices. And when you look at innovation, I segregate it into two buckets, kind of, right? You've got one of them that's more of an R&D, we're not doing this here, and one that's more of an innovate within a process mentality. So when you start looking at those cultural changes and this autonomy, how do you see the reconciliation between management and direction of the business as a whole and connectivity down to those teams that are moving in their own direction and keeping those things in sync and alignment? Is that something that you have addressed, Sangeeta?
So you're right. I mean, so we were talking about this earlier, right? The technology is the easy part, right? Culture and people, that's the hard part. So at Netflix, for instance, we're fortunate that the company is very not only is it risk tolerant, taking risks is highly encouraged. I mean, we take risks with our own business. How many of you remember the Quickster debacle from four years ago or whatever, right? So we do, and I think, and we're not ashamed to talk about it, right? And so you take risks as long as you're able to recover from it quickly. Right, and same thing about failure. Right, failure, it's a given that failure is not something to be afraid of. Failure is something that actually helps you move forward. So that's built in. The other interesting thing is to not think about some of this infrastructure work as a cost, and that's where the challenge is. And if you look at companies, you have Simon Wardley's pioneers, settlers. We were talking about this at dinner and earlier today. Model. Even within a company like Netflix, you will have teams that are pioneers, you'll have teams that are settlers, and there are teams that are very focused on business features. I'm building recommendations, I want the best possible algorithms out there. And I don't have time to figure out how to deploy faster or be more resilient. I need to do it. And then there are other teams like the organization I'm part of. For us, it's we're the front door to all of Netflix, and so faster time to deployment, resiliency, availability are greater requirements. So we're out there trying new things out. Not everything works out, but whatever does work, we then transfer it back. We have a path for it to be transferred back and cascaded out to the rest of the organization. So it's a good balance of being able to take risks and innovate, but then also try to keep it a little contained. Mm-hmm. And so then there are other teams who just focus, And again, as Aid pointed out, when you have these autonomous independent teams choose sort of where on the spectrum they want to be, and and that really actually works out well for us.
So addressing that a little bit more directly, how do you see that when you start looking at those teams? If I just finished a book, The 3-Box Solution. It's looking at that same concept. It's one team that's focused on preservation, right? Keeping things that are moving in the right direction and working, another team that's focused on creation of new things, and then another team that's focused on destruction or sunsetting or removing things that no longer are relevant. So those are great. How do you see that connectivity of managing those things from senior leadership down to the performance and behavior of the team?
I think the model that we kind of evolved towards is, so we look at teams of being around 4 or 5 people, 4 plus or minus 2 people. We think of these teams grouping together, and we call them departments or teams of 20 plus or minus 4, which I think is the perfect size of a classroom, apparently, right? Everyone can know each other. And what I think happens in that larger grouping, you begin to see the tendencies, like the cool kids will all group together and do the new stuff, right? Mm-hmm. The diehards, the workhorses, they'll actually get together and they'll take on platform, right? And I think what happens is the team kind of, we find that people gravitate towards each other. But I think the other thing then is so we look at what every team's doing and we say, like what are we trying to achieve? What is the work we're doing? What's the KPI? And that's, I think, how we tie the strategic goals of the company with the teams. We say the problem right now is growth of new members, right? That's the problem that you need to solve. We're not telling you how to solve it, right? You're going to solve it. We're just going to tell you what it is you need to do. And that's, I think, that KPI approach has been hugely powerful in tying the autonomy of the team, with the strategic goal of the company.
So formalization of that KPI, objectives of the business, and the specificity of how the team manages that is left up to the team.
Totally.
But the communication path of this is what we're trying to accomplish as an organization, how have you seen that formalized?
Netflix has a distinct and strong culture, and one of the sort of key values is management by context and not control. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of our equivalent, or it's analogous to what Eight said about guilt. And so our philosophy is we hire senior engineers, fully formed adults, and we give them all the context they need, and then they go and do their jobs. So we don't tell them. We tell them where we're headed, point them in the right direction. We don't tell them how to do it. And so that, then taking that a step up the chain, then as a manager, you have access to incredible amounts of information about the business all the way down. So that's how it cascades down. So an example is we launched worldwide in January. And our CEO, Reed Hastings, stood up at CES and made this announcement. And the entire company knew for almost a year, but it didn't leak, right? And that's just, we're very, very open. For a public company, we have access to a lot of information, and the idea is you absorb that context, and then how you apply it to your domain is then left to the team.
One of the nice things about Jet is that from the beginning, we had business people integrated with the teams.
Yeah.
And because it's e-commerce, there's another really nice thing, which is that the domains for an e-commerce company have been established and well-known for, if not decades, centuries. So it's very easy to be like, we know what teams we need.
Yeah.
We'll identify it and we'll start building teams around that. And it's also very easy to get business people who have deep knowledge of those domains, even right out of college. You can have courses just about learning these domains. So you hire them and you put them in there, and right from the get-go, they have enough knowledge to be the business lead for that team, even if they're very young. Mm-hmm. And so from the get-go, we had that tight integration, which meant the business, each vertical, I guess, within the business, from the front end side, the order completion side of it, the order handling, the fulfillment and packaging side of it, delivery, and the inventory management side of it, were all very well defined within, I would say, probably 6 to 7 months. Mm-hmm. And we had people from the business side tightly integrated, sitting as part of the dev team, basically considered part of the team. It's just, there's our inventory management team, which we've named Thor after the Marvel character. Or not, they're actually the fulfillment warehouse. I'm sorry, the inventory management is Iron Man.
Brilliant.
Makes sense.
So I apologize to Dimitri and Pavel. And as part of those teams, they have business people. And even their sub-teams will often have a business person whose focus is that sub-team, even if it's just like one engineer. And they're very tightly coupled. They work together. They, it's a team, and there's no difference. And so it has very tight, very well-defined understanding of what they need to do, and very smooth acceptance of these are the business needs, these are what we're executing on, and we will do it as efficiently as possible.
So Cassie, you see a little bit different perspective, right? You're going
Yes.
into multiple companies, and some of them that are just trying to figure this out for the first time, which is where a lot of folks probably are, as they're trying to figure out in a much different world than an e-commerce world, how to create that domain model and how to segregate those teams. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I was telling Eric earlier, I'm jealous. Can I sit at your company for a few months? But because normally, like when we go to different companies, essentially it's usually the engineering team who says, hey, we want microservices because that's what we want. And the business is actually usually not included in that conversation. And once the business is not included in the conversation, then we're already an uphill battle. And so when we're talking about, you know, the feature teams that Eric is a part of, where the business and the engineers are very closely coupled, and which is great because then you have that back and forth feedback. We see that in different organizations when even like the VP of product and the CTO are not having a conversation about what that looks like. That's actually where we actually start having that conversation, because if that doesn't happen and that dynamic doesn't happen, then we're not going to see it on the teams on the ground. And so that's sort of the big issue that we come across a lot.
Can I add something?
Yes,
So
please.
as I'm listening to everybody, one thing that strikes me is, maybe it's obvious and you all have figured it out, but one thing that occurred to me is, one thing that the whole microservices architecture is in some sense highlighting is the need for the techies and the engineers to get themselves more aligned with the business at every level, right? When it's more monolithic, yeah, the managers up top, the leaders had to do it. Now the more it's getting pushed down, like everything else, like ops is pushed down, like testing is pushed down. So is this getting this context about how are you? How is it the sum of the whole? How does that work, right? And so I think that's part of what this is.
I think there's an interesting challenge there as well. Like, so one of our biggest challenges is actually managing our business partners. Okay.
Right.
Because they have to be bought into this as well. Like, so the anti-pattern is business guy comes in and says, "I've got 3 great ideas, and you're going to do them for me," right? And it's like, a lot of the time, those 3 great ideas are actually rubbish.
Yep.
There's no data behind them, and there's no business case behind them at all, right? What you really want is a business partner who comes and says, I have these 3 ideas, what do you think? What are your ideas? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Or even better, I have a problem to solve here, guys,
Yeah.
right? This is my problem. How are we going to solve this?
Yeah.
I think getting that bit right culturally is really important.
So that was a question that I was asking Eric backstage. It was when you start looking at that, you start seeing when you've got this diversity of customers that have specific needs, how are you aligning that with the team? So you've got your corporate objectives and you've got the team trying to meet those, and then you have these things hitting you from the side, which are these specific customer demands. So how do you balance that?
That's actually one of the hardest things. I think that no matter what we do, no matter what way we carve our teams, right, we have to accept that there's going to be incoming requests that just have to be done, right? And, we've worked at it a couple of ways. One thing I say to people is, okay, so team, we've got a great idea, but we got to accept the fact that 30 to 40% of our time might be distracted. So let's just accept that up front, right? And then what teams have done to respond to that, we've got this great thing called Red Hot. And in any given sprint, you can be the red hot engineer. And basically, that means you're the one who gets all the stuff coming in. You protect your team, right? If nothing bad happens, then you've got 2 weeks off, right? You can play. But realistically, you're going to protect your team for that period. So there's a couple of structures like that have evolved. I think ideally, sometimes you can get a team where they have like 90% or 95% greenfield, new initiative territory. But I think, we all have to be kind of realistic about our expectations there. There's always got to be incoming stuff, and you juggle,
So are you seeing any challenges with teams' ability to shift and pivot and drop things quickly when our tendency is to conceive something brilliant and then see it through to the end, and we don't want to let it go? Are you seeing things like that, Eric? How are you managing that?
Being on core infrastructure is kind of different, so I have a very different experience. But from what I've seen for the business-aligned teams, there's very rarely if something sudden comes in that the business needs, they're very comfortable with dropping what they're doing and getting to it. They might be frustrated, and part of the nice part about having such tightly integrated business with tech is that the business people who are part of the team develop a pretty good understanding of at least the basics of how the technology works. So if there's an outage or if there's an SLA issue or slowness because of a specific database, they understand why and that it's important to get it fixed. And they can argue up to their managers that they need to focus on that and push that up and argue, what is the cost if we don't? It's like, yes, you can have this new feature and we don't do this new purely internal thing that seems, irrelevant because it's not a new feature that customers will see. So yes, we can work on this, but keep in mind we're still going to, what we're working on is going to improve stability. And we have a history. We've got all the logs and history of what's been happening, and we can prove that this is how we'll improve stability. This is the customer experience right now. So you know the cost, and when you make the decision, and you can say yes, we've completed it, but you need to let us come back because the customer experience as far as stability is the same as it was 2 weeks ago, and we know we want to fix it.
I also want to add, I think you want companies and organizations to think in terms of, you mentioned corporate objectives. Well, corporate objectives should include availability, should include response time for the customer. So then it's not always pushing the shiny new feature out, right? It's making sure that the site doesn't go down. If I have 4 nines as my target, then that's a corporate objective as well, right?
So have any of you had any experience with the challenge of educating senior leadership from it's not just the overarching objective of increasing our customer base or expanding territories or creating efficiencies, but it's understanding how we deliver those things, and those are a part of the objective?
One of the keys is that it's for the higher up on business, they're divorced enough they're not integrated with the tech team, so they don't see the day-to-day, they don't know, the direct experience. So communicating that up can be challenging. So what we've been doing is basically for what we call tier 1, the services that impact customer experience, all of those have to publish daily reports of their uptime availability to everyone in the company. So everyone in the company, whether you're the CTO or CEO or you're basically working in our fulfillment center, you know the uptime of our website and when it has outages and why it had and explicitly in that email, you have 3 or 4 bullet points that say, this is why we had the outage. So we are telling you, and it is now a conscious decision, and you understand the consequences, and it is now a business decision that, like Sangeeta said, it is a key business value to focus on that versus focusing, and you can properly weigh the cost benefit of availability versus this other set of features that you want to roll out.
I think, and again, there's a big thing there as well, which is building trust with your business partners. Because you're right, they're not going to understand the difference between MongoDB running on the old Colo versus DynamoDB running on this and the total value, whatever. But in a sense, building the awareness of, guys, what's the value of this new shiny little red dot on the website, this new button, versus the site being down for 8 hours, right? Keeping that education and chatting, and it's about conversation, it's about engagement, and like I say, building trust. We sometimes find it's like, you just say, hey guys, you got to trust us to run the operation, and that means that 40% of our time we'll be refactoring. We'll be doing stuff that you'll never know about, but we're doing it because it's right for you. It's good for you.
Yeah, you had made some comments about that, Sangeeta, when you were looking at things that your team does that may not be completely visible, but have a huge impact on your ability to deliver.
Most of what my team does, nobody out here, if you're a customer, if you're an Netflix subscriber, see directly, right? But we power everything. So another thing is is quantifying it with business partners, right? So we have Adrian Cockcroft, who was an ex-Netflixer, once made this statement, and Netflix is a metrics generating machine that also happens to stream movies and TV shows. And that was a joke, of course, but we're so extremely data driven. Mm-hmm. So one of the metrics that everybody has a laser focus on is what we call SPS, streams charged per second. And you can quantify it directly to a dollar cost of the cost of the business. So every outage is what's the SPS? Is there an SPS impact? If it is, and it's like up there, and then you look at how many missed streams, how many missed signups, and that's it. Next time someone asks you about the new red dot, well, that's, how does that compare to an SPS drop? We're losing, it's an acquisition hit and it's a retention hit, right? So that's another way. Put it in terms of metrics and data.
Having the engineering teams really start to really get invested in the business itself is very, very important. And so what we've actually seen with the microservices architecture or the cross-functional teams is around, okay, the Amazon way, I build it and I run it and I see it in production and I'm there from front to end. And that from an engineering point of view, that increases the cultural awesomeness of the company because now I'm invested in the product.
Sure.
I'm not just writing
Yeah.
a piece of code that someone told me to do and my bonus relies if that breaks or
Right.
not.
So you've got a paradox here.
Yeah.
And the paradox is this. Trust is built on results, right? When you do something over and over again, I start to trust you. But innovation is built on failure. Where do you see that balance and where do you see the challenges?
We're lucky, okay?
I like lucky.
Okay, so basically I say we're lucky because we're not a bank, right?
Yeah.
So it's really easy in retail, to, particularly as well when all of your revenue is in a tightly focused part of the day, if you break any other time of the day, no one notices, right? But yeah, we're not a bank, right? And so there's a little bit of flexibility. We're not a bank, we're not a hospital. Nobody dies, right, if they can't buy a dress. Some people actually might get a heart attack, right? But realistically, everything's fine. I think, it's a tricky one. It's tricky.
If you want to give people the freedom to innovate and try new things, you kind of start from there, right? And someone's got to go first, but then once you see the results of that, I think that then feeds the next round of.
I think.
Oh, sorry, but bringing it back to earlier, failure is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so that's actually where we need to focus on and where, when we split things up into smaller teams, you fail and you can iterate quickly. You fail in such a thinner slice that actually as Sangeeta said, it makes you succeed. It actually teaches you something. And that
That's
in
right.
itself, I think, builds trust.
I think so. So we built a mechanism which turns out to be one of our best meetings. So it's one of the two recurring meetings that I really enjoy at Gilt. It's called the quality meeting, and this is the meeting where you can show up and say, it was me, I broke the site, here's what happened, here's why it failed, and here's what I've done to fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again. And everyone goes, oh, great, right. There's no finger pointing. There's no, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. It's actually an incredible collaboration and a learning. Every failure is something to learn from, right? Yeah. And you need to build that mechanism in so that people feel okay about releasing every 5 minutes and sometimes making a mistake, but being able to respond quickly to it.
Yeah, so I think the whole blameless postmortem thing,
Yeah.
firm believer in that. And so when things go wrong, it's not about who did what, it's about why did the tool allow you to make a mistake? Because humans are going to make mistakes.
Right.
Let's just, that's not even worth arguing. So given that, what can we do to make the probability of a mistake lower, right? And how can we fix the tool? And that's really the focus. Or how could we have been alerted sooner? Right? So that's the focus there.
So to summarize our last little sprint of conversation, we've had lots of conversation around, we're all responding to the digital transformation that's going on in the world and the behavior
For sure.
of consumers. As corporations, we're trying to figure out how we use technology in order to respond. Microservices is a great way for us to create velocity and innovation. But what we're hearing over and over again is that the biggest challenges are those cultural challenges and also those communications challenges up and down the chain in the organization in order to be able to do that successfully and in a unified approach. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's everything we just said. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Why didn't you say it up? Why didn't you say it up front?
I should have
It's been an
started
hour.
with
the last hour.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's talk a little bit more specifics. So when we start looking at it, you go, okay, there's all these crazy terms that are flying around like polyglot. We go, polyglot is good, polyglot is bad. Where is that happy medium, and how do you make those decisions? Are there places where you're creating guidelines, barriers? Do you have a measuring stick in order for doing these things so that you're somewhere between innovation and chaos, but hopefully closer to the innovation and efficiency and not closer to the chaos.
We borrowed, sorry, but actually, I think this is actually really all about you, right?
Yeah.
Because we
Cassie.
borrowed an amazing idea from ThoughtWorks called the Technology Radar. And that allows us to think about all the cool stuff that we could play with and then talk about it rationally and then say, hey, this is actually coming to something that we trust, it's coming to the center, it's coming to something great. Hey, this is a technology that didn't work, push it back out, hold on this technology. And it's a wonderful language because it's not, aggressive, it's not, it's actually a great discussion. I don't know if you...
No, absolutely. I mean,
Perfect.
the tech radar that we do, it is actually more of a conversation. It is not a mandate of like, oh, these things you should never use again, and these things we should definitely use. It's actually more of like, let's try this out. Let's see if we see some churn in the industry around this. Let's give this a try. And so when we talk about polyglot and when we talk about different languages and different tools and different frameworks, we really, really embrace that because as technologists, we get really excited about learning new things and about
Shiny new
seeing like the
toy.
best way to do
We're
it.
all a
the
little
shiny
geeky.
Yeah, we're all a little bit geeky, but that's actually, we'll take it further, is that's how you're going to maintain, the people that you've hired, and
That's right.
retainment of those companies. So if you have your engineers who are sitting there bored day after day, and actually their motivation is maybe more by bonuses and those types of things, which I've seen in actually much bigger organizations, that motivation actually, I find that like if you give new tools and you give the flexibility to pick new tools, that motivation is actually a lot stronger because you're geeking out. That's our passion, right? That's what we like to do. In terms of like just with microservices and how that makes that a little bit more available is that each team can be their own black box of innovation. They can actually say, you know what, this framework looks good for what we need.
Right.
The only thing I would say is like maybe pull back as an organization and make sure the communications between those services and some sort of standardization around certain things is still important so it doesn't all jumble up into, happy shiny toys all over this place,
Yeah.
So.
Right, so I think service boundaries, right? If your IPC, your protocols, your serialization formats, those people rarely are playing around with that stuff, right? So
Yeah.
within, to Cassie's point, within your system, you can do that. A couple other things. So the one thing around polyglot, like anything else, there's no, is it good or is it bad? Well, no, really, it depends. I think, why do you want to try a new piece of technology? Is it the shiny new toy syndrome, or is there some benefit, right, real benefit? And if so, having to kind of identify that and clearly articulate that is one step, right? And so if there's a good example, an email thread going on right now within my org is, it's all about async these days, right?
Yeah.
Are you doing RX? Are you doing gRPC? Are you HTTP2? And we went through it with one of our apps, and it's like, yeah, we're seeing a performance gain, but not quite to the order that we thought because the workload is different. It's not CPU intensive or whatever it is, right? And so, is it? So yes, there's a benefit, but is it commensurate with the effort that would go into working all our other tooling, because async debugging is hard,
Yeah.
all of that other stuff. So you start making those comparisons, right? And then going back to KPIs or your business objectives. At the end of the day, if you're getting a marginal increase in performance or throughput, and you're kind of taking on costs that eventually will take you away from your corporate goals, then you'll make the right decision. So I think that's one way we think about it.
So there's a breadth of impact concern,
Yes.
right? So
Right.
you're looking at it and saying, how broad is the impact of that specific decision? And if it's narrow and team focused, then probably simple decision.
That's
And
right.
if it's broader, then that needs to be
Yeah.
concerned. Do you have do any of you have a formalized structure, or is that a more informal structure for managing that?
We do, and we've actually open sourced the structure in terms of we have an architecture board, which is a virtual board who brings the teams together, right, to discuss and understand, what's new, what's not, and to facilitate the conversation. And to Sangeeta's point, to make the very few small subset of recommendations that we need for the larger teams to interoperate on the wire, DNS, HTTP, REST, a very small set of easy, decisions. but we try and leave as much to the teams as possible. What's amazing is through that discussion, what we find, and I think it's actually a good metric, it drives consensus. You know, people like to innovate, but nobody likes to be different all on their own. Nobody wants to be a snowflake. So you end up with 80% of the things are the same and 20% are different and fun and novel, and maybe they live and maybe they die, but you've got that innovation on the edge, and that's actually amazing.
Yep.
So we're looking at that. We're saying, there's that innovation within the preservation, right? And then there's that innovation in the brand new create model. Where are you seeing those decisions made, Eric? Is that being made at different, at the developer level? Do you have an innovation group that's responsible for that? Are you seeing those ideas and directions coming from different places?
For us, it pretty much comes from wherever. So
I love that.
Each team will think about what they want. Talking about the polyglot stuff, and do we want to use something else? Do we want to use this database? There's kind of I would say we've started developing a culture of why, where you want to use, say, Cassandra for your data store. We're on Azure, so most of our stuff that needs to be column store database is using either HBase or table storage, because those are provided services that come with management that we don't have to worry about. So Cassandra has additional costs. And the answer to that, from the top all the way down to everyone else is, well, if you can tell me why you want to use Cassandra, you can prove that it solves a problem that we don't solve with other tools, well, then absolutely use Cassandra, as long as you're also willing to pay the additional costs that will come with it.
Right.
But if you can't tell me why, then obviously you haven't thought this through well enough to justify investing 3 or 4 weeks of, potentially 4 to 8 weeks of developer man hours into implementing this system, which may just as easily be solved with something we already have. But if you can prove it, if you're willing to answer that and you're willing to take the time to answer the why, which I think is the minimum required time to actually justify using something new,
Right.
then you will get support around it, and you will be like, okay, I'd go with it. And if it doesn't work, okay, fine, awesome.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure we're not putting this in something where it has to work.
Right. Right.
And if it does work, that's really awesome, and maybe other people will start using it. But if you can't answer the why, then it's never really going to leave the train's never going to leave the station.
Although the why means that people are kind of asking for permission, right? So what we prefer to do is, let's say, okay, we're making the architecture board, we're making a recommendation, right? You can ignore it, okay? Now, if you ignore it, you are on your own, right? You picked
think that's
Cassandra,
key.
right? You're a mess. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. Don't
Yes.
ask us for help.
I think that's key. That's key. So I totally agree with you. We have you asked about formal processes. We don't have an architecture board, but we have this forum called Technology Strat Forum, where all the leaders come. And
Yeah,
the same
something
thing. You
similar,
come
yeah.
here, you come there, present your idea. You do a memo up ahead of time, pre-read, present your idea, and people will comment and ask questions. And the idea is to get people to poke holes, right? And if you're able, no one at the end of it is going to say, yes, go ahead and do it. No one's going to bless it or say, don't do it. But you get enough opinions and questions that make you either more comfortable in your decision, or you may change course, or you may actually back off. And then the other key part that we haven't touched upon as much, I think, so far into the conversation, is this whole operate what you build model. You mentioned it. Completely follow that. So if you want to use Cassandra, but the rest of the company's on Mongo or DynamoDB, okay. But when you get called at 2 a.m., it's you on the hook. And at that point, people are going to go, why would I not? There has to be a very strong, compelling reason
Right.
for me to not use what 90% of the company uses. It's production hardened. And I don't want to be the one bringing the availability goals down, right? So
Right.
that's the check and balance there.
So again, risk, right?
Yep.
So it's looking at it and saying, risk is not just one group, it's a culture, right?
Right, yeah, that's right. And it motivates people
Yes.
when they're on the hook.
But on the other side of that, there does have to be that balance, right? Where you're looking at it and saying, if we expect to be innovative, if we expect to be able to do things, we're going to have to be tolerant of failure, so that risk and make the right decision, and that you failed and that's okay. We're not going to scold you for it. As a matter of fact, we're going to look at it and say, you failed in a great way and you tried something great that could have great benefit. Don't give up,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
has to be a part of the culture as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So what areas do you see these technologies shifting the most, right? When we start looking at development language.
I could actually,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
interject
Go
really
ahead. Yeah,
quickly.
jump in.
So you did point out one thing about the way we have the culture of why
Yeah.
and asking permission. I don't actually think that's a bad thing because it forces you to acknowledge that you not only does the person external to your team have to trust you, but you have to trust their judgment because your decisions will impact them.
Right, right.
And so, and granted, there's also slightly different. This was a team that's kind of on a first tier, so them having an outage impacts
Got it.
customers.
Of course, of course.
But there is that acknowledgement that, you know what, I'm not in this alone. Yes, I do want to have a lot of flexibility, but my decision impacts not just my team. And I can
But the
say I
other
will
team.
take
Yeah.
responsibility, but that doesn't do anything for the web team when your outage causes them to go out.
Right, right.
And they can't do anything because they can't even begin to go in and work on your system. Whereas if you had asked them, are you comfortable with me doing this? And they say, yeah, we're fine with you. You take the ownership, and we know that the risk you provide, that the risk you're generating won't really impact us
Yeah,
very much.
yeah.
So we're very comfortable. But if you don't do that and you just say, you know what, I'm going to do Cassandra, I will take the responsibility for fixing it when it goes
Right.
out in production. You're not taking responsibility for fixing the other team when they go down because you went down.
Right, right.
And they
I
don't
got
even
it.
know what happened.
Yeah. I
Well,
got it.
That's
So-
true, but I think there's some of it is also in microservices, right? You have to invest in being tolerant of failure.
Yep. Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So if someone, like I work on, one of the systems I work on is our API tier, which is a tier one in internet-facing services. So we have, if we depend on practically every microservice within Netflix, and so anybody could go, if anybody goes down, we could be impacted, and we just design our system to not be impacted by
Yep.
that. So that's another core principle,
Right.
right? That allows
yeah.
us
I agree.
autonomy and innovation. I think that's important.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you hit on it. It's principles, right?
Yeah.
It's not rules. It's not you must.
I
It's
think that's
these
fair,
are the
yeah.
principles,
That's
and
good.
one of the
Right.
principles is autonomy.
Yeah.
And if you can't
Yeah.
achieve autonomy for some reason, that's okay, but understand the
And
risk.
collaboration is
Yep.
a
Yep.
great other
Yeah.
principle to
And I-
have, right? You know,
And I
so-
think really it's all just about trust.
Yeah.
And if you can't trust an individual to own a microservice from top to bottom, even if they've only been with the company for 4 months, and you can't trust them to know that they need to go talk to,
Right.
that other people could be impacted by their decisions and take responsibility for it, then you can't really be doing microservices to begin with.
So this is out of the blue, but as you start looking at this from a traditional IT company, somebody who's never done this, and they're going through a very traditional IT process that's very horizontally organized, and they're getting ready to go into this world, listening to you guys, it sounds like the wild, wild west, and it's just trust me.
So much
just
fun.
trust me. But many organizations are achieving a lot of success. How would you make these guys feel comfortable about that decision?
I have a slightly different perspective of the trust thing. Trust is important, but I think what I was trying to get at earlier was trust is important, but there's also you need to own your system and plan for the worst case. When you run in a public cloud, sure, I trust Amazon. I think they're awesome when we pay them lots of money, but you know what? We build redundancies because they can go down too. And so it's the same concept. So you trust on the one hand, yes, absolutely, I trust you to do the right thing, but you know what? I will make sure I stay up if you go down, and that's just, I have to do it.
Yeah.
And so that has to be also a part of the thing. So so it's not just, absolutely you need to have trust, but in terms of architecting and designing your systems, you have to have that mindset. Plan for failure, architect for failure.
So are you seeing, Cassie, are you seeing companies kind of being very thoughtful about which teams are given which challenges based on those, an engineer isn't an engineer isn't an engineer. So we've got one team that we think would be really good at this, and another team we're going to discourage. Are you seeing those kinds of things?
I think we're seeing, we are seeing some of those. We're seeing companies look at different teams and say, oh yeah, they're our star team, let's try it with this and those types of things. And so I guess, going back to like the trust issues is that when you are actually building your organization, or actually if you're trying to transform your organization into something that's a little bit more, like Netflix or like Guild, and being able to have autonomous teams, you have to actually like look at all of the individuals and see like who's actually going to be flexible in this new model. Because if people are not going to be flexible in this new model, it's not going to work. I mean, because in the end of it, as we talked about, it's the people who are actually working on it. So.
Very good. So, did you want to follow on?
Just real quick, I think one thing we've all talked about, but haven't maybe talked about here, is hiring and it takes a certain mindset.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking for new people, sure you can grow people from within, but also definitely look for people. We look for people who would thrive and succeed in an environment like this.
And there's probably an alignment that makes sense also, right? You look at it and say all microservices aren't going to be created equal. Some should be relatively straightforward, and some may be incredibly challenging. So
I think, so is it a Wild West? No, I think it just reflects the nature of people and motivation and smaller teams. I think that, more traditional companies who were looking into this are looking in because they see a problem. The problem is most likely we can't get changes to production fast enough. We can't innovate fast enough. That's the problem, right? So they're looking at this to say, is this a way to solve that problem? And I would say, I think the answer is yes, right? It does make us move faster, right? It's great. And then the question is how, and I think, to Sangeeta's point, also to your point, Cassie, is so the best way to do it is to start. Just take one little slice and let's experiment. And your organization's going to learn a whole new way of thinking just by starting with that. One thing that was very effective for us, and I only realized the power at the time, our CTO, Mike Brizek, amazing guy, he said at one point, so you can do whatever you like on this new service, right? But you're not allowed to touch the main production database. And you're not allowed to commit to the Ruby on Rails repository, okay? And you're like, what? There's rules, But those two rules influenced all of our design decisions to build a completely separate, fully operational piece of code that could be deployed in parallel. So the outcome of those two rules. And so maybe if you need to initially set some guidelines like that to some rails to keep people focused, it's enormously powerful. It sounded odd at the time, It's like, I can do this in the database in 3 seconds. Look, watch. It's like, no, it's worth it to have those rules in place.
Well, we're out of time, but great conversation. I hope that some of this has been helpful to allow each one of you to understand what it looks like to move towards this microservices architecture. I'd like to thank Sangeeta. Thank you, Cassie, Eric, and Abe. Thank you so much. Brilliant.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.